Other people reincarnate with swords, dragons, or noble titles. I opened my eyes on a cold quarantine floor, and 20 girls in white masks already stared at me like a second plague. The city had one law carved into every wall. When a man appears, death follows. I had been alive for less than a minute, and 3 girls were already screaming for chains and fire. They did not ask my name. They did not ask where I came from. They pinned my arms, locked iron on my wrists, and dragged me through a courtyard built for medicine, prayer, and fear. The place looked too clean to be innocent. White towers, glass pipes, rain collectors, herb terraces, a sealed dome overhead. Beautiful city. Terrible first impression. Worse than most funerals. My system activated when they slammed me against a stone post. Quarantine protocol online. City stability 62%. Northern reservoir pressure abnormal. Time to local failure 6 hours, 14 minutes. Now that was useful. No combat skill, no magic sword. Just diagnostics, contamination maps, pressure data, and structural alerts. I had not become a hero. I had become a maintenance nightmare. They hauled me into a cell under the North Tower. Stone walls, rusted bars, one water bowl, no blanket. Outside, the girls argued whether I should be studied, burned, or drowned by dusk. I ran the first scan on the water. Charge, 100 to 85. Result, drinkable, but sedative traces present. Even prison water in this city was softened on purpose. Control started before the throat. I spent another scan on the wall and floor joints. Charge, 85 to 70. A major feed line ran behind the cell, linked to reservoir V3. Pressure spike confirmed. The failure predated me. That mattered. If the system was right, then I was not the source of the disaster. I was just the perfect suspect. For the city, those were almost the same thing. For me, they were not. Voices gathered outside the bars. One girl wanted me executed before dark. Another wanted the council. A third, calmer one asked why the North alarms had not checked V3 already. Useful mind. I stepped to the bars and saw her. Gray work coat, ink on her fingers, map case under one arm. Not a priestess, not a guard, some kind of technician. Exactly the type I needed alive. I told her the North Reservoir was already blooming from inside. She did not believe me, but her face changed when I named the right line. Good. The city still had professionals, not only fear. She ran. 3 minutes later, the first real siren hit the tower. Not ceremonial bells, a hard quarantine horn. Somewhere above us, V3 started venting gray mist, and the whole city blamed me. The bars opened. Not for freedom, for transport. They dragged me out in chains, while girls on the upper walkways shouted that the omen had already begun. Fear loves clean explanations. They took me to the purification ring in the main square. It was not a village bonfire. Worse. Iron restraints, white lamps, steam vents, drainage gutters, and a furnace for sanitary killing. The crowd was massive. Students, workers, healers, gardeners, young guards, mostly girls around 18 or 19. No men, not one. I finally believed the city's history without a lecture. The system kept feeding me numbers while they chained me to the ring. V3 overflow spreading. North housing contamination in 41 minutes. Eastern cistern risk next. Lower release jammed. There it was. I shouted before the councilwoman raised her hand. The infection is in the reservoir, not in me. Open the lower release or the north quarter starts choking before midnight. The square froze. Then the screaming got louder. They thought I knew too much because I caused it. Fair, that was exactly how it looked. The gray-coated girl came back and demanded a test before ignition. The council gave her 5 minutes. For the crowd, it looked like mercy before execution. For me, it was an investment window. If she came back wrong, I burned. If right, I gained value. She returned in 3. Wet sleeve, pale face, breathing hard. V3 was failing. Gray bloom confirmed. The lower release was stuck, and the last engineers who knew it died in the first plague. The square turned on itself instantly. Some girls yelled to burn me anyway. Others screamed to save the North District first. First public status shift. I was still a curse, but now a useful one. They did not unlock my chains. They simply redirected me. 10 minutes earlier, I had been fuel for a ritual. Now, I was an escorted tool, dragged below because fear lost to infrastructure. The valve chamber smelled like hot salt, old metal, and sweet vapor. My system highlighted the fault line. Manual rotation impossible. Corrosion lock at 1/3 angle. Vector assist, 50 charge. I had 70 left. Spend 50, save the district, keep 20. Refuse, and I died cleaner, but faster. Easy math. Hard body. I warned them to clear the line. The gray coat backed me instantly. I used 50. Charge, 70 to 20. The backlash hit at once. White sparks in my vision. Blood from my nose. My right hand shook so badly I almost lost alignment. Then, the valve dropped. Gray water slammed into the emergency channel. The chamber screamed. Above us, the horn changed pitch. Not death alarm, stabilization tone. The North District was not saved forever, but saved tonight. When they dragged me back into the square, no one cheered. Good. Cheering would have been stupid. What I got instead was better. Fear mixed with doubt. The city no longer understood me. The council delayed purification until dawn. Officially, I remained a contamination risk. Unofficially, half the square had watched me stop a failure none of them could even diagnose in time. They threw me back into the cell, but this time 5 guards waited outside instead of 2. My system pinged through the blood on my lip. Local node stabilized. Archive access level 1 unlocked. That was the real first victory. Not trust, not freedom. 1 hour ago, I was a nameless omen in chains. Now, I was the only prisoner in the city too valuable to kill quickly. They did not kill me at dawn. Worse. They washed my face, tightened my chains, and marched me below the North Tower like a hazardous tool everyone hated but still needed in working order. That changed my status more than any speech could. I was still the omen, still the man who had appeared before the gray bloom. But now I was also the only idiot who could read failing pipes. The lower technical sector looked older than the city above. Narrow galleries, salt on stone, copper lines sweating in walls, quarantine marks layered over older engineering signs. Honest ugliness. A captain in lacquered white introduced herself as Tessa and made the rules simple. I solve what they point at, I stay breathing. I lie, sabotage, or run, and I go back to the furnace ring. Tessa was built like a threat and spoke like an audit report. Clear, disciplined, already hated me, and far too practical to waste time pretending otherwise. I respected that immediately. The gray-coated technician from the square arrived with maps under both arms. Her name was Lyra. She did not apologize for almost burning me. She just asked if I could read pressure past one valve. I told her I could read whatever the city was willing to confess through failing infrastructure. She did not smile. Good. In this place, too much smiling usually meant a sedative was involved. My system pinged at the first junction. North Lower Works. Water unstable. Filter chain degraded. Hidden contamination probability 27%. Resource loop opportunity detected. Finally, useful language. How was new and important. If I stabilized lower nodes, the system could convert recovery into charge, access, and sharper diagnostics. The city was my prison, but it was also becoming my battery. First task, a filtration line under the old clinic wing. 3 workers were already coughing near the grate, and the younger guards looked half ready to bolt. The plague still ruled by memory here. Tessa ordered the girls back with one sharp command. They listened instantly. Another note for later. Authority here was brittle, but when it held hard. Break that, and the whole city might too. I scanned the filter chain. Charge, 20 to 5. Bad number. But the result mattered. The contamination was not active plague. It was residue from sterilization compound reacting with gray sediment. That meant 2 things. First, the city had been poisoning itself with quarantine chemistry for years. Second, I could fix this without brute force, if they gave me tools, and 20 minutes of silence. I asked for vinegar, heat, cloth, and the smallest worker with steady hands. Tessa looked offended that I was giving orders in chains. Lyra overruled her before the argument got entertaining. The smallest worker was a thin apprentice medic named Niren. Terrified eyes, sharp fingers, no patience for dramatic pauses. Good. I can do a lot with competence and fear if competence wins first. Under my direction, Niren flushed the line twice while I tracked the pressure rhythm by ear. No vector push, no blood price, just correct sequencing. I wanted them to see I was not a trick. It worked. The coughing stopped. The water lost its gray sheen. The clinic line stabilized. System reward. Node recovery plus 12 charge. Archive token fragment acquired. Business at last. Lyra took me to a side archive room after that. Locked cabinets, old maps, glass tubes full of ash. She said if I wanted more access, I would earn it through output, not pity. Fair rule. The room also gave me the first hard timeline. The city had not suffered one catastrophe 12 years ago. It had survived a chain of failures, then built religion around the ending. That mattered more than any prayer. If the first disaster was a process, then the second could also be a process. I was not fighting destiny. I was fighting maintenance debt and myth. Before I could enjoy that thought, another alarm hit. South cistern this time. Not gray bloom. Pressure collapse. Different symptom, same panic. The city was a choir of old wounds learning my name. Tessa dragged me there faster than dignity allowed. On the way, 2 girls from the upper terraces spat at my boots and called me Ash Bridegroom. Nice. I prefer simple hatred. It saves time. The South Cistern fed bathing houses, wash lines, and part of the herb gardens. Not glamorous, but crucial. Lose it, and half the city loses hygiene in 2 days. Then panic does the rest for free. I ran a dry visual read first. No charge. The problem was obvious once I stopped looking for magic. Someone had sealed an emergency bleed line years ago and forgotten it existed. Classic civilization. Tessa asked if I could open it. I said yes if someone wanted to lose 2 fingers turning the wrong wheel. Silence. Then one worker girl stepped forward before the guards chose someone expendable. Her name was Sana. Laundry crew, 19, calloused hands, tired shoulders, and the expression of someone who trusted clean water more than prophecy. I liked her in 3 seconds flat. I talked her through the valves while Lyra watched my face instead of the machinery. Smart woman. She was testing whether I solved problems through skill or because the system whispered. Sana took the first wheel, then the second. On the third, she hesitated. The old metal screamed. I used a minimal vector nudge worth 8 charge to keep the spindle aligned instead of snapping inward. Charge, 17 to 9. Price, burning in both wrists and a pulse behind my eyes. Cheap enough. The bleed line cracked open, the cistern exhaled, and half the room cheered before remembering I was cursed. Again, no speeches, just results. Pressure normalized. Garden supply saved. System reward. Infrastructure trust plus 6 charge. Local hostility in the south sector dropped by 9%. I'll take it. That was the first real loop. Fix node, gain charge, gain access, lower panic, expand influence. Not glamorous, very powerful. If I lived long enough, I could turn the city into my table. The city answered immediately, because good stories do not let you build in peace. A priestess from the Purification Council arrived and demanded I be returned to the ring the moment the repair ended. Her name was Mother Severa, and she was exactly the kind of enemy crowds love. Calm voice, holy certainty, and the conviction that any useful thing must still be sacrificed if doctrine says so. Severa argued that every repair proved my contamination deeper. Tessa argued that dead tools repair nothing. Lyra argued with numbers. The workers just watched. Watching crowds can be recruited later. I stayed quiet until Severa claimed the city functioned before I appeared. Then I asked why 2 independent sectors had failed in one night if the system was already healthy. Good hit, good audience. She hated me on the spot. Publicly, too, even better. You always want one early enemy who is easy to read, easy to hate, and foolish enough to turn your success into her personal insult. Severa forced a compromise. I stay alive until sunset and keep repairing under holy supervision. If one more district fails, I am purified as the obvious origin. Brutal, convenient, motivating. Lyra quietly called it stupid because sunset gave us 6 hours and 3 unstable sectors. Finally, someone in the city knew how to insult policy with proper technical precision. I filed that away. Dead district boards gave me my first map of the city above the pipes. 4 powers mattered already. Purification, archive, ward administration, and the gardeners. Nice, layered problem. Purification kept fear holy. Archive counted truth and buried half of it. Ward administration moved bread, water, and heat. Gardeners tuned roots, scent, and compliance. There was the real board. That changed the stakes immediately. I was not just trapped in one hostile city. I was standing under 4 rival systems sharing one machine and pretending they all wanted the same thing. Before I could ask better questions, Niren ran in from the clinic wing. One recovered patient had started convulsing after drinking from a supposedly clean line. New problem. Perfect timing. We reached the room, and I saw the real danger immediately. Not plague. Sedative rebound. The city had tapered people for years without tracking load. Their medicine was making them fragile. Tessa wanted the room sealed. Sevra wanted the patient marked. Mira, the older clinic woman in charge of recovery beds, wanted facts before ritual. Good. Another person worth keeping alive. I scanned the patient. After earlier rewards, I'd climbed to 15. Scan cost 10, charge 15 to 5. Result? No plague markers. Severe withdrawal stress. Improper rotation of calming compounds that turned the whole room. If I was right, then the city had been mislabeling chemical collapse as spiritual corruption for years. Mira understood the implication first, and it hit her like a hammer. I told them to warm the girl, salt her water, and stop the lotus wash for 1 cycle. Sevra called that blasphemous tampering. Mira ignored her and did it anyway. Good. I like practical rebellion. The patient stabilized within 20 minutes. Not cured, not pretty, but alive and breathing evenly. Mira looked at me like professionals look at dangerous data. Half gratitude, half fear. System reward. Clinical correction plus 8 charge. Medical suspicion down. Access request available. Lower clinic stores. Huge. If I gained the clinic, I gained medicine, beds, and information flow. That was also when I understood the first big truth. The first catastrophe killed the men. The years after, it kept killing everyone else more slowly through fear, ritual, and bad maintenance. Sunset was close when Sevra returned, smiling in that cold, holy way I already disliked. She announced one final trial. If I was truly useful, I could stabilize the east vent before prayer. The east vent fed the dormitory tiers where the younger women slept. If it failed, gray condensation would pool by morning and panic would spread through the city. Public stakes. Perfect. I was in. Tessa marched me there in chains through 3 stacked walkways full of watching faces. This time the girls did not only spit or curse, some just stared. Better. Fear with doubt is how myth cracks. The east vent was a nightmare. Old fan tower, warped copper, unstable suction, and one shattered balancing vane. A full fix was impossible with my charge, so I had to choose efficiency over elegance. I ordered cloth, wire, and 2 narrow ladders. Sana from the laundry crew reappeared without being asked. Nice. Fast recurring ally. Niren came too, carrying tools bigger than her forearm. That was my first little team, and I saw it instantly. Tessa for force, Lyra for systems, Mira for clinical truth, Sana for labor, Niren for precision. Not trust yet, but definitely structure. I used only 5 charge here, not to force the vent, but to read the oscillation timing. After rewards, I had 13, then spent 5 and dropped to 8. The body cost stayed manageable. Using that rhythm, Sana and Tessa reset the vane while Niren wired a cloth brace over the split support. Crude repair, temporary, effective. The fan caught and dormitory pressure recovered. The whole East Gallery heard the air return, including one girl in Bell Sector Gray who froze halfway through a timing strike and stared at me like a theorem had just insulted her faith. Her name came later, Iria, assistant to ritual scheduling. For now, what mattered was the look. Not trust, not fear, recognition. Someone above had just seen the city obey me instead of prayer. System reward. East vent stabilized. Charge plus 15. Access up. Public witness added. Bell office junior scheduler. Better than applause. Applause fades. Witnesses rewrite rumor. At sunset, they did not burn me. They escorted me back below with twice the guards and half the certainty. Sevra looked furious. Tessa looked alert. Lyra looked hungry. Iria kept watching, and in my cell, With dried blood on my mouth and iron still biting my wrists, I opened the archive ping. Beneath the North Tower sat First Event, Stage 4, and 3 sealed ward signatures. The city had not buried one catastrophe. It had layered prayer, administration, archive logic, and horticulture over it until no one remembered the machine under the myth. Better for me. Archive Level 1 did not give me the whole truth. It gave me something better. 1 missing page, 3 maintenance stamps, and proof that the first event had not started as a disease at all. Stage 4 was not a plague label. It was a containment label, which meant the city had once tracked the catastrophe like an engineering failure, not a curse. Somebody had rewritten the story later. I did not get long to enjoy that. Tessa unlocked my cell at dawn and told me I had won a promotion. I was still chained, still hated, but now I was dangerous enough to be escorted everywhere. Lyra met us outside with 2 sleep-starved eyes and a stack of copied diagrams. She said if I kept breathing, she wanted answers. Good. Curiosity is better than kindness in a city built on sedation. Our first stop was not another reservoir. It was the lower archive itself, or at least the part they still admitted existed. Stone shelves, sealed tubes, mold, and enough lies to build a religion. Lyra showed me the rule before she showed me the room. I read, she keeps the papers. I speak, Tessa decides who hears. Reasonable. Nobody trusted me enough to give me privacy yet. Healthy instinct. I spent 10 charge on the first archive scan. Charge, 23 to 13. The system highlighted altered entries, erased names, and one pattern that tightened my whole jaw at once. I hated how right it looked. Male mortality was not random in the records. The edits tried to hide it, but the deaths clustered around relays, heat plants, and active utility lines under the city. That was no coincidence. The first wave had hit men hardest, yes, but the pages beneath the edits showed something uglier. The dead were not grouped by households, streets, or family beds. That detail changed everything. They were grouped by systems. Water relays, heat plants, root channels, places where the city itself moved something through bodies and then pretended that was fate. That was not natural drift. That meant the city had simplified the truth into superstition, because superstition is easier to teach than infrastructure. Men became the symbol, the machine stayed hidden. Tessa did not care about philosophy. She cared that the Eastern Dormitory wash line had turned sweet overnight. Sweet water meant lotus contamination somewhere it did not belong. The wash line fed lower bath chambers, where recovered girls were kept under observation. Not fully broken, not fully clear. That made them useful and dangerous at once there. A careful city prefers women like that. Soft, grateful, and supervised forever. Recovery here was not freedom. It was managed weakness with warm water and blankets. A soft prison, neatly managed. Mira was already there with 2 assistants and the expression of a woman deciding whether to trust my diagnosis or her own training. Doubt like that keeps people alive. I trusted that kind of face. The patients were young, hollow-eyed, and too quiet. Their hands shook when the sweet steam touched the room. My system tagged them all in the same cold way. None of them looked free. Partially recovered, stable truth response low, relapse risk moderate to high. Suddenly, the city's calm looked less like healing and more like ongoing maintenance. The wording alone made me colder. That was the first time the system warned me about people instead of pipes. Useful. Also worse. Machines fail honestly. Frightened people fail in ways that look sincere. That warning had teeth. Reading metal is cheap. Reading a person through a machine gets expensive fast, and I should have respected that lesson before it came back with a real price tag. Now it had one. I scanned the room atmosphere. Charge, 13 to 3. The answer was simple and ugly. Someone had rerouted trace lotus vapors through the wash line to keep them calm. Deliberate, persistent, institutional. Mira swore under her breath. Tessa reached for her sword. Lyra looked at the vent and started counting layouts that could hide the reroute. Right women, right room. Bad sign. Great team. We shut the steam feed and flushed the baths with cold reserves. 3 girls started crying. 1 vomited. 1 tried to kneel and apologize. Recovery here meant withdrawal. Then I made my first real decision about people. I asked Mira which patient still helped others instead of folding inward. She pointed at quiet Aaron by the blankets. She never stopped working. The system read Aaron's sincerity high, fear moderate, dependence low. I made my mistake right there and did not even feel clever while doing it at all. That should have warned me. I saw honesty and usefulness, then assumed durability. Those are not the same thing. In this city, they can share one body and still ruin your whole plan. I paid for that later. I convinced Tessa to let Aaron work under observation in the lower clinic. Useful hands, I said. Faster recovery, I said. Mira hesitated. Lyra watched in silence. That silence should have warned me. We stabilized the wash line by hand and won a small reward for it. Clinical node corrected. Charge +8. Lower clinic stores unlocked with cots, salt, and bandages. Progress finally had a room. That was our first real node below the city that belonged more to us than to the myth. Not safe or secret, but useful. Medicine rooms become networks very quickly. That mattered more than it sounds. I counted aloud so everyone heard the shape of growth. Charge back to 11. 1 clinic node, 2 medics, 1 archivist, 1 captain. And somewhere above, 1 bell girl had seen too much. For the next 6 hours, things almost worked too well. I hate that phrase now. We sorted supplies, marked routes, and flushed another contaminated line below. I should have distrusted that piece. Sana volunteered extra shifts. Even Tessa stopped flinching at my input. The lower clinic began to feel less like a cage and more like a workshop. It felt dangerously good. That should have scared me sooner than it did. A lower sector that starts functioning cleanly feels like progress from the inside, but from above, it shines like a wound under glass. That was exactly why the city hit us. Smooth growth without interruption is for propaganda, not survival. By evening, the lower clinic felt almost stable. Then Aaron vanished. At first, I had panicked. Then I saw the folded blanket, the untouched broth, and the open side hatch. No struggle, no blood. She had walked out on her own, calmly. My system still held only 11 charge, but I burned 8 on a directional trace anyway. Charge, 11 to 3. Result, not abduction. Compliance returned from chapel bells. I paid anyway. There it was. Aaron had not betrayed us. She had responded. The sincerity reading had been true. She wanted to help. That part had never been the lie. That was the worst part. But the city still owned a deeper rhythm inside her, and I had pushed her out too early. Honest people break too if the system still lives in their nerves. That made it worse. That was the real mistake. Not trusting the wrong person. Trusting the right person before she could survive the pressure. Honesty without resistance still serves the tower. We found the damage fast. Aaron had walked straight to the lower clinic intake door with 2 white cloaks behind her. She had obeyed the first warm instruction she heard. She never even resisted. By the time Tess and I got there, the side room was compromised. Not raided completely, but noticed. The cloaks had seen extra bandages, salt stores, and a route mark. One scratch can doom a route. Tessa wanted to drag Aaron to the drains and leave her there. Mira stepped between them so hard, even the guards stopped breathing. Good. Moral friction means the room still has a spine. I made the call. Burn the node. Not with fire, with chaos. We flooded the room, smashed labels, mixed supplies, and made it look like panic storage after the vent crisis. Node loss confirmed. Lower clinic side room compromised. Supply efficiency -18%. Charge reward, none. Good. Failure should feel like debt, not like a dramatic speech. Aaron spent the night in restraints, sobbing and apologizing to everyone she had almost killed. I did not hate her. I hated my own arrogance more than anything else. That was the honest part. Mira said the lesson out loud so the whole room would carry it. Partially recovered is not recovered. Not here. Not with bells, scents, and ritual cues everywhere. The room needed to hear it. From that moment on, quarantine meant quarantine. No shortcuts, no sentimental promotions. No one left supervision just because they wanted to help badly enough anymore. Not in this city. Tessa agreed in the only way she ever agreed with anyone. She added guards to our lower level and told the white cloaks the patient had relapsed violently. That was agreement from her. Lyra waited until after midnight to tell me the worst part. The white cloaks had not found the node by luck. The archive controller had walked them there, then turned away before entering. That got my attention immediately. He had not inspected the room himself. He had let them find just enough to flush out how we would respond. He was not looking for guilt. He was mapping structure. Lyra had proof. The cloaks ignored two easier routes and went straight for the compromised hatch. The controller had marked it from above. The clinic was too efficient. That was the point. The worst part was how little he needed to see. One delayed report, one repaired line, one room that smelled more of salt than sedation, and he could sketch our shape in his head. Too efficient. That phrase lodged in my head like a nail. In a city decayed by fear and ritual, smooth function itself becomes suspicious very quickly. I hated how useful it was. If one lower sector starts making too few mistakes, somebody intelligent notices. The controller was not chasing guilt. He was tracing competence through outcomes. That was the whole terror. The next day, he proved it personally. A minor leak opened in the South Herb conduit. Not enough to matter, not enough for a full alarm, just enough for someone competent to hurry over and fix it. Tessa saw the trap and still had to send people, because the herbs fed the clinics and upper baths. Ignore the leak, lose medicine. Fix it too well, expose the network. No clean option existed. So we split the response. I gave the diagnosis from a distance, Sana did the crude labor. Lyra filed the request late on purpose. Tessa staggered the guards. We tried to look useful, not organized. It almost worked. Then the controller stepped out from a maintenance arch and watched Sana tighten the herb line in exactly the right order. He said nothing. He just nodded once and left. That was terrifying in a way screaming never is. He had confirmed something, filed it somewhere in that dead black head of his, and moved on. Predators who do not rush are always the expensive kind. I asked Lyra what he had learned. She answered immediately. The lower sectors still contain people trained to think in sequence under pressure. A network is forming. She sounded almost impressed. By evening, I had my first proper lower team, whether anyone liked the title or not. Tessa for force and access. Lyra for records and maps, Mira for recovery, Sana for labor, Niran for precision. 5 women and 1 chained man do not sound like a revolution, but in a quarantined city built on fear, 6 people who solve the right problem in order are already a structural threat. We needed a new node fast because the clinic side room was dead weight now. Lyra suggested an abandoned decontamination chamber near the old root drains. Dry, hidden, and hated for the smell. Tessa hated the idea because the chamber sat near sealed plague channels. Mira loved it because no white cloak would choose to pray there. Sana just asked about carrying. We moved at night with dim lamps and wrapped tools. The chamber was foul, cracked, and full of obsolete scrub tanks. To me, it looked like a future base already. I loved it immediately. Need: a new secure node. Resource: abandoned decon room. Cost: 1 night, 6 bodies, every spare rag we owned. Result if successful: beds, storage, and privacy from tower medicine. While the others cleaned, I spent my last 3 charge on a contamination read. Charge: 3 to 0. Result: old plague traces inactive. Chemical burn risk high. Air acceptable after venting. That was enough. We scrubbed until our hands stung. Sana hauled broken tanks aside. Niran sorted tools. Mira turned 1 alcove into recovery cots. Lyra marked the route and code. By dawn, the decon chamber had become our first true hidden node. Not borrowed, not tolerated. Hidden. Small. Ugly. Ours. The system rewarded the difference at once. Network integrity plus 14%. I gave the count out loud. 1 archive contact. 1 captain under protest. 1 medic. 2 workers. 1 hidden node. Charge 0. Safer in structure, weaker in body. Fair trade so far. That was the trade I wanted anyway. Last week I had only personal charge and panic. Now I had almost no power left, but hands below the city kept moving even when I could not. Mother Severa ruined the mood on schedule. She arrived with incense, condemnation, and a public demand that the lower levels be re-blessed before sunset by council order. She always arrived on time. Predictable enemy, useful enemy, Every crowd needs one early face to hate, and Severa was generous enough to keep volunteering that service for free. Crowds need easy hatred, but even Severa brought value by accident. Her ritual crew opened an old side chapel for cleansing water, and behind its wall, Lyra found a sealed pipe registry. That changed the room. That was when Iria reached us, the hard way. Not through loyalty, through panic. The Bell office had received rewritten timing orders signed by 3 factions that were never meant to agree. She did not join us below. Not yet. Better. She became something more useful. An upper conduit with access to schedules, ceremony windows, and the exact hour the city expected obedience to peak. For the first time, the network had a real eye above ground that the public still considered legitimate. Ito, Mika, call it what you want. Every machine needs a voice in the visible layer. That widened the game at once. We were no longer just surviving in the ducts. We were building a lower system while someone above could now feed us timing, noise, and public fault lines. The controller was not guarding a prison. He was tending an architecture of behavior. Somewhere below the towers sat the organ that fed this place calm. Somewhere above, people competed to own it. And if the root channels were real, then Central Lotus was no shrine. It was the throne organ of the city. Reaching it would not just save lives, it would start a succession war. By the second dawn, I had learned the block lesson properly. Trust the person. Never trust the city inside her. And always ask who profits when the city calls fear virtue. By dawn, the decon chamber smelled less like disinfectant and more like a future. Bad future maybe, but ours. That was enough to make everyone work faster than fear usually allowed. I count it first because base building without numbers is just optimism with shelves. 9 stable, 3 under watch. Charge, 0. Food, 3 days. Water, 4. Hidden nodes, 1. That number looked pathetic, but it was the first honest foundation I had seen in this city. Everything above lived on softness. We were finally living on inventory, labor, and ugly stone. Tessa wanted walls first. Mira wanted cots. Lyra wanted lockboxes for paper. Sana wanted buckets and hooks. Niran wanted light. Good. Real teams never want the same thing at the same time. So I split the block the only sensible way. Survival first, secrecy second, comfort last. Decon chamber becomes shelter. Clinic stores become treatment. Papers stay mobile until we trust the room. The room itself helped. 3 old scrub tanks still held pressure in dead sidelines. If Ilya had been here, he would have kissed the pipes. Since he was not, Sana got the honor instead. We dragged 1 tank upright, broke the corroded intake, and turned it into a clean water barrel. No system spend, no blood price, just salvage and stubbornness. The best kind of growth. Mira converted another tank into a wash station for recovered girls. That mattered more than a speech ever could. If the city owned hygiene, it owned dignity. We needed both below. Naren spent an hour stripping copper mesh out of old sterilizer cages. By sunset, she had rigged 2 lamp sockets and 1 alarm bell from scrap. Tiny things, structural things. I respect both. Lyra organized the first paper cache with more reverence than prayer. Pipe plans, old failures, route timings, and altered archive scraps went into waxed cloth tubes under a false floor grate. That false floor mattered. Hidden rooms are good. Hidden records are better. A network survives raids if people scatter. It survives history if the papers do. Lyra understood that without being told. The system rewarded the room after 12 hours of useful labor. Hidden node secured. Passive trust income stabilized. Charge recovery +2. Small gift, huge meaning. The base had started breathing. Breathing bases attract need. By midnight, Mira already had 3 lower girls waiting outside the chamber. 1 with a burn hand, 1 with lotus shakes, 1 just hungry enough to stop pretending. We could not take all 3 openly. Capacity matters. If you turn every problem into shelter too early, your base becomes a grave with organization. Hard lesson, important lesson. Mira chose the burn hand first. Practical choice. A healer keeps workers alive, but a worker with ruined fingers becomes a burden in 3 sectors at once. We hauled her in before dawn. Her name was Rhea. Laundry crew, 18, smart mouth, blistered palm, and enough suspicion to survive one more month without us. I liked her immediately for the correct reasons. The system read her sincerity medium, fear high, dependence low. After Aaron, I trusted that read exactly halfway and no further. Honest did not mean stable. Useful did not mean safe. That became the new rule of the chamber. Nobody leaves supervision because they look grateful. Nobody gets route access because they cry honestly. In Lotus Colony, emotion is not clearance. The social scans left a stranger bruised than valve work. After reading too many frightened faces, I sometimes heard warmth where there was only obedience. In this city, that could kill just as fast. Tessa enforced that rule harder than anyone. Which was funny because 2 days earlier she had wanted me purified. Now she was the first to slam the bolt on soft stupidity. Good growth. Our next need was obvious. One chamber was not a base. It was a secret waiting to be stepped on. We needed a second node, linked by something stronger than memory and hope. Lyra found the answer in a maintenance ledger nobody had updated in 7 years. Under the herb terraces sat a dry seed room with its own vent shaft and a dead counting desk. Need, a second node. Resource, abandoned seed room. Cost, 1 night, 2 ropes, 3 carries, and the risk of moving too much traffic below the terraces. Result if successful, storage and planning. We moved after second bell, when the warm sectors drifted into their evening hush and the white cloaks got lazy with certainty. Confidence is the best curtain any resistance can ask for. The seed room was better than the decon chamber, and worse in one critical way. Dry shelves, narrow entry, usable desk, and a vent opening. But the lock had been replaced recently. Recently meant danger. Somebody still cared enough to close it well. Lyra checked the seal and went pale in the annoying professional way that always means the problem just got more expensive. Black wax, archive stamp, and 1 hair trapped in the edge. The controller had inspected this hall less than a month ago. Not by accident. He was cataloging neglected spaces below already. I could have walked away. Smart man's choice. But the room was too good, and good rooms under bad cities never stay free. If we did not take it now, the tower would take it first. I spent 12 charge the moment the system ticked me back up to 12. Scan on the lock, hinge, and dust pattern. Reserve, 12-0. Price, burning at the back of both eyes. Worth it. Result, no alarm line, no fresh watchers, no hidden die. Just a recently confirmed archive annex. Which meant the controller had looked at it, judged it dead, and moved on. Insulting. Useful. Sana and Tessa forced the lock while Naren caught the pins and cloth before they rang. Beautiful work. Brutal work. The door opened, and dry air hit us like clean, stolen luck. The seed room became Node 2 by morning. Storage racks, planning desk, vent shaft, sealed jars, and 1 old floor map scratched directly into the wood under the desk. Cities hide honestly when tired. That floor map gave us our first real growth ladder. Survive the lower circuit, build autonomy, steal 1 upper channel, gain a public voice, reach Central Lotus, rewrite the city. There it was again. The city did not just feed and shelter these girls, it dosed them. Carefully, routinely, and through multiple senses at once. Infrastructure as emotional policy. Ugly. Brilliant. Lyra finally said the phrase out loud. Central Lotus. Not a statue, not a shrine. The civic organ under the tower that blended water chemistry, air additives, heat, scent, and ritual flow. That made the whole city click into place so hard I almost laughed. Warm sectors were not luxury. They were slow-dissolve wards. Baths were not comfort. They were dosage points with towels. Gardens were not gardens. They were root-fed distribution fields. Festivals were timed load balancing for mass emotional regulation. Lotus Colony was a quarantine machine wearing silk and flowers. That truth did not free us. It did something better. It gave us leverage. A machine can be mapped. A myth only wastes your time. I prefer enemies with pressure ratings and maintenance access. Before we could use any of that, the city forced us back into practical work. South Cistern bread rations were cut by 15% after the East Vent repair. Hunger was now joining fear. That pulled a new kind of girl into our orbit. Not medics or workers. A ledger clerk named Vale, who knew the ration tables well enough to see they had been nudged on purpose. Vale was 19, sharp-faced, angry, and too smart to survive long upstairs. She came to us not because she trusted me, but because the math told her whole block would be starved into obedience. Perfect. I love recruits who arrive through arithmetic instead of destiny. Arithmetic is easier to test and harder to seduce. Usually. In this city, I stopped saying always about anything. Vale's value became obvious instantly. She could read scarcity through paperwork before hunger reached the floor. That made her more dangerous than a blade and more useful than a speech. She also brought us our first clean forecast. 2 sectors would be ration cut before week's end. 1 because of contamination loss. 1 because the tower wanted pressure on lower labor compliance. We suddenly had a timeline. 3 days before hunger hit the workers. 2 before the cloaks blamed unrest on stress responses. 1 before our small, hidden chambers stopped being enough. Base building loves deadlines. They turned planning into movement. We needed food, not just cots and papers, which meant the herb terraces and seed room had to become productive, not symbolic. Rhea, burn hand wrapped and pride intact, volunteered the first garden crawl. Laundry girls know terraces well because damp cloth and soil trays share the same low roots under the city. Rhea led Sana and Vale through the lower herb drains instead, and they came back with seed trays, drying roots, fungal bricks, and one half-starved gardener named Anya in tow. Fungal bricks looked disgusting and tasted worse, but they could keep 12 people alive for 4 days if cooked right. Ugly food counts, especially in stories built from infrastructure. Mira and Niran turned 1 rack of the seed room into a grow shelf fed by warm waste venting. Not a greenhouse, not a miracle, just the first calorie loop that did not pass through the tower. The system rewarded that immediately. Autonomous food production initiated, passive charge recovery +3, network stability +9. It was the first time the base fed itself, even a little. I gave the count out loud because scenes like that need numbers. People under active protection, 12. Hidden nodes, 2. Medical stores, low but real. Food, 4 days, maybe 6 with fungus. Charge was still miserable, but the important part had shifted. At the pier of my first day, power lived only in my interface. Down here, power had started living in water, paper, cots, and labor. That was when the controller struck properly. Not with guards, not with a raid, with elegance. 1 corridor was left unsupervised, 1 ration clerk transferred, and 1 warm sector bell delayed. Lyra saw the pattern first, 3 small absences creating 1 tempting opening, the kind of opening a growing network would naturally use, which meant it was not a gift. It was bait with paperwork. He was doing exactly what terrified me most. Not hunting people, hunting the shape of our problem-solving instinct. Leaving gaps and watching who flowed into them. A structural predator. Vale still argued we should exploit the opening. More grain tickets, easier movement, better numbers. She was right in the short term and wrong in the deep one. Good recruit, not yet a strategist. I said no. It hurt. Hunger deadlines and open doors are how desperate networks kill themselves. The city wanted us to move cleanly through a corridor nobody should have trusted, so we left it empty. That decision paid out the next morning, when 2 white cloaks and a black-coated observer sat in that corridor for 3 hours waiting on ghosts. We lost food. We kept our shape. Correct trade. Tessa looked at me differently after that. Not warmer, sharper. I had chosen structure over immediate gain. Soldiers recognize that before they admit they do. Useful shift. Rhea's crawl through the herb drains brought back more than seed trays. It brought back gardener apprentice Anya, 17, half-starved, furious, and carrying roots like crown jewels. Anya did not trust me, Tessa, or anyone else below. Good. Trust is a luxury seed. Suspicion survives transport better. She knew which roots fed people and which only softened them. That changed the food problem fast. Fungal bricks kept bodies alive. Anya could turn the seed room into something slower and better. Bitter greens, healing roots, and 1 crop the tower ignored. Need. Food node, not just food stock. Resource. Seed room, warm vent, stolen trays, fungal mash, and Anya's knowledge. Cost. 2 shifts, 1 hidden lamp, and every spare hand we had. Vale hated the plan because crops do not fill stomachs tonight. Mira loved it because medicine starts as plants, not prayer. Tessa sided with whoever finished before inspection. Fair style. We split the labor cleanly. Sana and Rhea hauled trays. Niran rigged heat reflectors from sterilizer mesh. Lyra tracked vent cycles. Anya planted like she was daring the city to stop her. That was the first time the base sounded alive instead of hunted. Metal scraping, water dripping, 2 girls arguing over root depth. Tessa cursing at a bent frame. Better music than bells above. By midnight, 1 shelf held fungal mash, 1 held medicinal stalks, and 1 held the first real food crop that did not pass through a tower ration table. Small yield, huge psychological effect. I counted the gain out loud because no one builds a civilization on vibes. Fungal reserve, 4 days for 12. Root reserve, 3 treatment cycles. Fresh crop, not ready. Hidden nodes, still 2. Then Vale found the prettier opportunity. 1 ration route had been cut on paper, but the bread still left the ovens, which meant somebody above was stealing the difference before workers saw it. That gave us a choice the genre always loves. Sit safe and let the city starve the South dorms, or hit the theft and risk being seen early. Food now versus secrecy later. Perfect, ugly math. Vale wanted the ledgers. Tessa wanted the carrier. I wanted the pattern. We watched 1 full cycle from a vent slit and confirmed it. The extra bread vanished under warm sector escort. Not white cloaks, not black cloaks. 2 warm sector attendants with perfect posture and empty smiles. That made the theft worse somehow. Even bread theft here had to feel soothing while it happened. We did not attack them. Too loud, too obvious. Instead, Vale rewrote 1 crate tag, Lyra delayed 1 routing bell, and Sana shifted 1 cartwheel pin by half a notch. Beautifully small sabotage. The result was better than a fight. The stolen bread rolled into the South Dorm intake under official bells because Iria delayed the ritual sequence by 40 heartbeats. Public victory loves timing. That was our first upper layer win. Hungry girls saw bread arrive under an official signal, not a hidden theft. The stewards screamed. The dorm saw proof that the top could be wrong in daylight. Iria did not cheer. She just sent 1 folded slip down the laundry route. Bell office is watching the ward cuts now. Good. Public legitimacy had begun to crack from both sides of the floor. System reward. Civic goodwill in South dorms plus 7%. Trust income plus 2. New informal route unlocked through laundry returns. Not dramatic, but delicious. I like victories you can chew. It also carried a cost. Reading the faces below after the bread drop hurt worse than turning valves. Relief, suspicion, dependence, hunger, gratitude. All of it hit at once. My head rang for an hour. That was the next refinement of the circuit's price. Too many social reads in 1 cluster left emotional static behind. After a crowd scene, fake warmth echoed inside real gratitude. Mira adjusted my recovery protocol on the spot. No decisions for 1 hour after mass reading. Bitter root, salt water, and 1 human answer repeated twice. Excellent medicine. Anya used the same hour to make herself useful in a way I could measure. She mapped which root channels under the terraces carried nutrient wash, and which carried calming residue from warm baths. That mattered because it made the gardens legible. Some roots fed growth, some fed behavior. In Lotus Colony, even the plants had jobs in social management. I hated that. I respected it too. Need. A 3rd function for the base. Not a new room yet, but a waste loop. If we wanted crops, medicine, and people below long term, we needed clean disposal before smell became a confession. Sana solved it with brutal simplicity. Old ash drums, sand, charcoal, and a split drain under the decon chamber. Ugly toilet engineering. Civilization needs that more than speeches. Rhea mocked the whole job, then worked faster than anyone. That was becoming her pattern. Insult first, competence second, loyalty last. Strong worker profile. Definitely keep. When the waste loop held through first flow, I gave another count. People under active care, 12. Hidden nodes, 2. Functional systems below, water, clinic, food start, waste disposal, dispatch. That looked better than it had any right to. which also meant danger. If I could feel the shape of the base this clearly, then sooner or later the controller would feel its pressure too. So we dirtied the edges on purpose. One broken shelf left visible. One lamp left flickering. One water barrel marked wrong. Growth with friction. We fed the city the image of survival, not design. Vale hated that principle with accountant fury. She wanted clean numbers, clean rows, clean routes. Tessa backed me instead. Armies survive longer when perfection is treated as bait, not as a goal. Anya gave us one last upgrade before dawn. The first bitter shoots came up under vent heat, green and small and absolutely beautiful by undercity standards. A base that sprouts thinks ahead. By sunrise, the lower city could do what it could not when I arrived. Feed a dorm, hide a patient, file a route, grow a crop, and bury its waste without asking the tower for permission. Sevra, naturally, treated the same morning as proof the city needed deeper blessing. She announced a lower purification circuit and started moving prayer teams with scented water bowls. Scented water meant danger at a different scale. If the bowls were tied into root dispersal, then prayer itself was becoming an inspection method. The city was learning. So were we. Lyra and Vale broke the route logic open together. Prayer bowls matched the sectors showing the cleanest correction, and the signatures above them came from 4 hands, not one ministry. White cloaks for daily softness, black cloaks for structural hunt, ward administration for ration pressure, gardeners for environmental rewrite. The city finally had a readable faction map, so Mira started testing me the way I tested patients. 2 questions after every crowd scene. 1 cup of bitterroot, 1 hard look. If I answered too softly, I did not make decisions that hour. That classification helped instantly. Every woman above us was no longer just a face in the colony. She was a type of pressure, a possible risk, or a possible route. The world got sharper. By the 3rd night, Node 2 had become more than shelves. Vale turned the seed room desk into a dispatch board. Route marks, sector timing, cloth tokens. Numbers living where they belonged. The decon chamber became recovery and sleep. The seed room became planning and storage. 2 ugly rooms, 2 functions. Enough to call the beginning of a lower base without embarrassing myself. Then came the proof that the top was playing larger than ritual. A minor leak opened near the decon route. We ignored it on purpose. By dawn, it had been fixed under archive seal. No blessing, no labor notice, just quiet intervention. The controller was not alone anymore. Somebody above him wanted the lower wards intact until they could be politically harvested. Worse, that was more frightening than a threat. It meant the controller was not an outsider peering down. He understood the machine almost as well as we were beginning to. He was a rival systems mind. If I stayed quiet, the city would absorb the lower level back into managed calm. If I moved too fast, he would trace the contour and cut the base open. Elegant problem, terrible odds. The only answer was growth with friction. More nodes, but never too smooth. More people, but never without quarantine. More fixes, but always messy enough to look like survival instead of design. I wrote that rule on the underside of the dispatch board. If a lower sector starts looking healthier than fear should allow, the tower will look directly at it. Never shine under a sick city. That line became our doctrine. Dirty competence, effective disorder. Hide every good decision under 2 ugly ones. It offended Lyra's soul and made Tessa grin for the first time. Worth it. By dawn, the base had changed shape again. 12 people under care, 2 hidden nodes, 1 food loop, 1 dispatch board. 1 captain, 1 archivist, 1 medic, 2 workers, 1 clerk, and me. I was weaker personally than at the start of the block. 0 charge, shaking hands, and a worse relationship with my own judgment. But the city beneath the city had become stronger without me. That was the real growth. Not my power, their interlock. Water moved, food stacked, roots held. Mira worked without orders. Vale counted without asking. Tessa defended what she would not name. And somewhere under roots, baths, vents, bells, and warm sectors, the central lotus kept breathing through every quarter. The winner above ground would own doctrine, food, calm, and history. Block lesson paid in full. 1 honest girl almost burned our first node. 1 black-cloaked mind found us by the shape of our order. And somehow, beneath both disasters, the base still got bigger. By morning, survival was no longer the whole game. 3 upper decrees collided before breakfast, and Lyra finally named the shape of it. The city was splitting over how to use the crisis. Purification wanted fear. Archive wanted total structural exposure. Ward administration wanted controlled scarcity. Gardeners wanted a cleaner environment to work in. 4 powers, 1 dying machine, and above all of them sat Regent Salome, acting keeper of ward hierarchy, and the last woman with legal authority over Central Lotus access. Finally, a political throat worth aiming at. Salome's problem was obvious once Vale got us her ration pattern. She knew the city was rotting. She also knew that if the myth of male contamination broke, her entire command model died with it. That made her better than Sevra and worse than the controller. Sevra believed. The controller calculated. Salome benefited. Those are the ones that make worlds feel real and expensive. Then Vale brought the phrase we had been waiting to hate. Gardeners were coming from the central wards under Regent's seal, not just to rebalance us, to prove Salome could still command the city. Tessa asked what that meant in plain language. Lyra answered without blinking. If the lower wards wake up, Salome loses narrative control. So the gardeners will quiet us before the city sees the diff. That gave Block 5 the right shape at once. Not only environmental siege, political siege. The lower network had become useful enough that one faction wanted it erased and another wanted it mapped A. And because the city was fair in the worst way, both plans could happen at once. We could be fed, dosed, studied, and erased in one synchronized operation. Beautiful machine. Rotten throne. I forced myself to count before panic. People under protection, 12. Hidden nodes, 2. Food, 4 days, maybe 6. Charge, still low. Enemy timeline, 3 nights before the rebalancing locked in. That was the shape of Block 5 immediately. Not another clever repair, a siege through atmosphere. If we stayed passive, the city would melt our little network without ever drawing a blade. Mira cut straight to the ugliest point. The partially recovered would go first. If the gardeners adjusted warmth and scent, the fragile girls in her cots would fold before workers noticed, which meant the med node stopped being support and became the center of the whole defense. Not heroic, not glamorous, but in a city that weaponized comfort, recovery beds were suddenly our front line. Naren asked if we should move everyone deeper and shut the nodes. Fair question, wrong answer. Retreat would keep us breathing for a day and starve us by the second. The base had grown beyond hiding. We needed countermeasures, not panic. Root filters, alternate water, dry heat, false scent signatures. Things get worse when the protagonist has to answer logistics with logistics. Lyra spread 3 stolen planning sheets across the desk. The gardeners would start at the south baths, then the lower dorm vents, then the terrace routes. Strategic order. They would soften the labor districts first, then push calm downward, then use hunger and relief together until every lower worker stopped asking why things felt wrong. Beautiful method. I hated it. Vale saw our first opening. Rebalancing needed fresh dosage ledgers from ration control. If she corrupted those numbers, the gardeners would dose the wrong districts. That alone changed the room. Good move, but not enough. Mislabeling buys hours, not victory. We needed to survive 3 nights, protect the fragile, keep feeding the base, and map their route access. That alone changed the room. Tessa solved part of that with brutal simplicity. Capture 1. I appreciated the spirit. The problem was that grabbing a gardener alive inside her own city is how streets start screaming. So we did the cheaper version. We hunted the route, not the woman. Sana and Rhea crawled the old laundry ducts while Lyra traced route access by seal marks and Vale forged one transfer slip. That gave us our first practical need of the block, a dry interception room near the south baths. Close enough to sample flow, far enough not to drown in perfume and steam. The abandoned bleach locker under the bathing arcade became Node 3. Narrow, chemical-stained, and ugly. Perfect. Tessa pried the inner latch loose while Sana packed the floor vents with old cloth. I spent 6 charge mapping the pressure pulse behind the bath wall. Charge dropped, pain rose, and the usual social afterimage came at once. That changed the room for me. fast. After reading so many signals, every face lingered too long in my head. That part was becoming unbearable. It made every new social scan feel dirtier than blood loss. Fast. That was the new body cost getting sharper. After repeated scans and social zones, I could still tell sincerity from imposed warmth, but the residue clung. Looking people in the eyes started to hurt. I hated that almost as much as the blood. Pain passes. Distorted reading stays. In a city like this, losing clean emotional sight is like going half blind near a turbine. Terrible profession risk. The scan showed a narrow branch in the wall carrying more than water. Lotus trace, sleep vapor, and something resin-heavy from the terrace roots. The gardeners were dosing through the plumbing. We cut a sample tube and passed it to Mira. She and Niran worked through half the day with roots, salt, vinegar, charcoal, and fungus paste. Primitive chemistry against a civic machine. Good odds. Actually, no, bad odds. But the first reaction held. Bitterroot slurry bound the lotus vapor long enough to weaken the calming effect. Not a cure, a shield. Temporary and ugly. The best kind. System reward. Countermeasure protocol learned. Ambient sedation resistance rose 4% within protected nodes. Tiny number. Huge meaning. The base had answered the city in its own language. The big public mechanism arrived by noon. Emergency Distribution Tribunal. One sector gets declared healthy, one gets cut, and one gets reviewed in front of the city for signs of hidden imbalance. That was our arena, only cleaner and crueler. If we stayed below, Salome would starve a ward and blame contamination. If we intervened well, we could break a lie in front of half the dome. Iria came down, white-faced, with the trial schedule under her sleeve. Bell Office had been ordered to time the water blessing exactly with the dosing feed. They wanted obedience and witnesses together. Perfect. One public stage, one visible myth, one loaded water line. If I could expose that line in front of the crowd, Quarantine City would stop seeing me as a rumor and start seeing a mechanism. Tessa called it insane. Mira called it reckless. Vale called it our first actual route into power. She was right. This was no longer about hiding better. It was about being seen correctly once. So we built the play. Iria would hold the bell sequence, Vale would switch one tribunal ledger, Lyra would mark the right feed, Mira would prepare anti-lotus slurry. I would break the blessing live. The real threat arrived 2 hours later. Not with bells, with silence. One warm sector corridor above the South Baths emptied, and every girl working there had been reassigned. Lyra went white. The gardeners were clearing an active route. That meant the first real application would happen tonight, and not as theory. They were about to rewrite an entire block. We split immediately. Mira moved every fragile recovery case to Node 3 and the decon room. Tessa doubled corridor watches. Vale prepared false ledgers. Sana and Rhea packed dry food and masks. I took the worst job, tracking social bleed across the lower wards. The more the city adjusted warmth and scent, the harder the circuit became to trust cleanly. Still, without readings, we were blind. 3 scans in 1 hour dropped me from functional to dangerous. I could still tell fear from calm, but imposed comfort began to smear at the edges. Every soft voice sounded half familiar. I hated it. That is the real price of social diagnostics. Metal just cuts your hand. People stay in your skull afterward. By the 3rd scan, even Lyra's dry face carried ghost warmth from some earlier corridor. She noticed me blinking too long and told me to stop looking at her like she was made of static. Fair. I was. We did not have time for dignity. We had time for maps and ugly chemistry only. Vale's forged dosage slip got us into the bath feed office by dusk. There we learned something worse than expected. The gardeners were not only increasing calm, they were lowering appetite. Hunger plus sedation. The city wanted the lower wards too tired to question and too empty to organize. Elegant cruelty. The aftermath of the first catastrophe had become policy. That changed our priorities instantly. Food moved above all. If the lower wards stopped eating, every node would fail in sequence. We needed a visible food win before rebalancing hollowed the base. Rhea solved the logistics gap by giving us something bigger than a cart. There was an outer maintenance ring beyond the public terraces where officially dead sectors still traded scrap after dark. I thought she was delirious from hunger, until she named the route, the condenser noise, and the women who lived there. Exiles, filter scavengers, surface ghosts the city had stopped counting. That widened the world exactly when we needed it. We were not trapped in a sealed jar after all. There were women outside formal census, outside calm cycles, outside regent accounting. Ria's old laundry contact on the ring traded us dry charcoal filters and one manual thermal cart in exchange for root medicine and future clean water rights. External Alliance, First Edition. That was worth more than the hardware. It meant I could now bargain across systems, not just crawl under one. A city gets smaller the moment you find someone beyond its count. The Tribunal Day used that alliance instantly. The thermal cart carried our slurry and spare filters under legal ward markings. To the crowd, it looked official. To us, it looked like a breach in the W. Then came the moment that had to become legend. In front of the tribunal basin, a dorm girl collapsed smiling into the blessed water. Severa called it purification. I cut the feed and named the mix. Not guessed, named. Lotus vapor, appetite suppressant, heat softener, crowd-slowing resin. One by one, Iria froze the bell line mid-strike so the whole square heard every word before prayer resumed. Mira forced the girl to drink our slurry in full view of the gallery. Tessa held the ring. The shaking stopped. The smile broke. The girl looked up terrified and fully awake under tribunal lamps. That was the first impossible public reversal. Not a hidden repair, not a lower room win. A city myth breaking under clean observation. Even Salome's balcony stopped moving for 3 full breaths. No one cheered. Better. Girls in the crowd looked from the basin to the bell tower to the tribunal ledgers like the world had misfiled itself. Public certainty lost pressure right there. Severa screamed blasphemy. The controller did not. He watched Salome instead. Important. Real players look upward the moment a myth fails, because they know authority has just lost blood. We got our prize and the only currency that matters in cities. Not trust, visibility. Lower wards now had a public case proving that blessed calm could be manufactured and reversed in open light. System reward. Public fracture plus 18%. Sedation credibility down. Lower resistance index up. One upper witness group added. There it was, the first metric that tasted like power instead of survival. We had one advantage left. They still believed the lower resistance centered in supply irregularities. They had not yet found the decon room or the dispatch board. So we fed that assumption hard. Vale rewrote the ration ledgers to make the bath kitchens look like the center of deviation. Lyra rerouted one map copy. Mira moved the strongest cases away before dawn. Quietly, Salome answered before sunset. One ration district was cut entirely, one bell office reassigned, and one outer ring conduit closed. She could not deny the tribunal, so she raised the political price. Good. At last, the regent moved like a regent instead of a rumor. That made the game cleaner. We had reached the stage where every lower victory now forced an upper countermove. I made the new count aloud so the room understood the scale change. 19 active below, 3 hidden nodes, 1 outer alliance, 1 upper conduit, 1 public win. Not enough. Finally meaningful. The base was no longer a hideout. It was step 3 on the ladder. Survive, build autonomy, seize an upper channel. Next came voice, then Lotus. I wanted everyone hearing the staircase now. By nightfall, even Tessa repeated the steps back to me without mocking them. Good sign. When the soldier starts using strategic language, the base has stopped being temporary. Then the city hit us where growth always hurts most. 7 girls from a lower dorm walked smiling toward warm transfer after one final redirected dosage wave. We intercepted only 2. That failure mattered because the crowd had now seen the cure. Every girl we could not hold became proof that public breaks are not enough without infrastructure to carry them home afterward. Good lesson, expensive lesson. Strategy in public and engineering in private had to grow together, or Salome would drown each victory in logistics before morning. That mattered. That was the stronger was now turn this arc needed. At the pier, I had charge and no one. Now, I had almost no certainty left. But below me, water, food, maps, and people moved. That is real growth. Not getting stronger alone, becoming less necessary to each motion because the system you built can breathe around your weakness. I cling to that when my hands start shaking. By the second night of rebalancing, we found the narrowest throat in the Gardner plan. Not the baths, not the dorms, the terrace root pumps. Adjust those, and half the lower city changes at once. That was the next target and the next risk. Hit too early, and the controller seals the undercity. Hit them too late, and the lower wards turn docile before dawn. My favorite kind of deadline. Lyra laid the route. Tessa picked the escort. Mira prepared anti-Lotus slurry. Vale forged a route assist ticket. We were no longer improvising. We were a counter system. Then the system handed me the line that ended the block properly. Route level variance detected beneath the tower. Central Lotus load rising. That alone changed the room. Below, gardeners are not correcting districts. They are feeding something. That sentence changed the scale of the whole city in one breath. I felt the whole map widen, instantly and badly. That changed the scale again. We had spent the whole block trying to survive environmental siege. Now the city whispered that every adjustment below was also supplying the heart under the tower. The base had grown. The enemy had grown clearer. And somewhere under roots, baths, dorms, and warm halls, the Central Lotus was inhaling all of it. Block lesson complete. Next move, or die gently. I woke before the bells, with salt in my mouth and route maps under my hand. Good sign. It meant the city had not swallowed us overnight, and the undernetwork still existed by morning. First thing, numbers. 19 active below, 3 hidden nodes, 2 compromised routes. Food. 2 hard days, maybe 3 if nobody panics. Water. 4. Charge. Climbing, but not clean. That last part mattered. The trust circuit had started paying differently after the rebalancing. Faster recovery, yes. Dirtier reads, too. The more I scanned people, the less clean faces felt. After 2 major ceremonies and a week of social diagnostics, eye contact had become work. Imposed warmth left after images now. Real fear and programmed softness started echoing in the same tone. That was the body cost I had been earning. Not just blood and tremor, emotional static. The city was getting harder to read precisely because I kept forcing myself to read it at all. Mira hated that symptom. She said if I kept pushing through social scans, I would start mistaking docility for trust at the exact moment the city needed one good lie to finish us. Fair. She had earned the right to criticize my bad habits. Half the girls below were breathing because she knew when to trust my numbers and when to slap the machine out of my hand. Tessa gave the next useful report. Outer patrol pressure had dropped. Inner inspection rose. Bell office was split. Ward administration was hiding grain. The city had entered open faction stress. Lyra translated it cleanly. Purification wants more fear. Archive wants the whole lower pattern exposed. Salome wants to keep command long enough to own the solution. We had entered the upper game. Good. Better to be hunted as a structure than dismissed as an omen. Omens get burned. Structures get studied. Studied things sometimes survive long enough to become governments. I laid the count out one more time because this block needed the contrast clean. At the pier, I had charge, panic, and no one. Now I had almost no certainty. But the city below moved. Water moved without me touching it. Bread moved without me begging for it. Maps moved. Guards rotated. Girls watched each other. Patients held patience. That is real growth. I wanted that marked. My personal power had dropped. The system hurt more. The reads were dirtier. But the network was finally stronger than my own hands. That was the first real transfer of weight in the story. Anya proved one axis first. The seed room gave usable harvest. Vale proved another by forging root slips. Iria proved the third by surviving above as our public conduit with a bell in her hand. Vale proved it next. She forged 2 more root assist slips from scraps of canceled maintenance orders. Not perfect, good enough for one pass through a lower service ring. Excellent work. Naren and Sana had already turned the decon room into something dangerously close to routine. Lamps checked, hooks sorted, water buckets labeled. If a place develops routine, it starts to become law. That was when Lyra unfolded the new route map and finally showed me what the tower had been hiding under the gardens. The root channels did not only carry nutrient wash or treated water, they carried schedule, heat release, fragrance dilution, sleep tempo, festival intensifiers, calm spread. The city was not just controlling people, it was irrigating behavior through infrastructure. Central Lotus was no longer just a dramatic name in my head. It was the organ that mixed care, sedation, rhythm, and compliance into one civic bloodstream and called the result harmony. Warm sectors suddenly made complete sense. Not rest wards, dissolution wards. Places where a personality could be softened, sweetened, and returned to function with fewer sharp edges than before. That was the real horror of the city. Not cruelty, efficiency. It did not break girls with obvious chains. It dissolved them into better fit parts and fed the process back through water and root. So the next objective stopped being vague. Stage 1, survive below. Stage 2, keep autonomy. Stage 3, hold one upper channel. Stage 4, win a public voice. Stage 5, take Lotus access. Only then do we choose the real ending. Repair the city, cut it open, or build something under it strong enough that the upper machine becomes optional. I liked having choices that big. Before we could enjoy the latter, the tower answered. One black cloak went down toward the roots. 2 gardeners took thermal stock. Irius sent one last note before her line went silent. Salome has called a full ward health review in 2 days. That was the upper equivalent of war drums. If we lose it, lower districts get sealed as unstable. If we crack it, the city changes owner. In plain language, the next block would not be about hiding better. It would be about whether a lower-built network could seize a public right to speak inside the machine that fed the city. Mira asked the only question worth asking. How long before they reach our channels? I checked the map, the shift board, the route timing, and the charge curve. Best estimate? Less than 2 days. That gave us the final rhythm of the arc. 2 days of food, maybe 2 days before route contact. 1 forged pass, 1 partial map, 1 dirty system. 19 girls below. No clean retreat anywhere. I looked around the dispatch room then. Tessa on the door, Lyra over the map, Mira packing doses, Vale trimming paper seals, Niran cleaning tools, Sana hauling buckets. The city below was real now. That was the last was now line worth speaking. I arrived here as the only man in a dead pattern. Now an entire second pattern had formed around me, and the tower had finally started seeing it. The system rewarded the thought with one cold sentence. Distributed autonomy stable. Maximum trust circuit load increased. New objective unlocked. Reach Central Lotus before the gardeners seed below. Then the dome bells rang once, low and far above us, and everyone froze. Not because of the sound, because this time it came from under the tower. The public review had already begun below.